In a peaceful suburban neighborhood of America where every house is meticulously maintained and the community is planned according to the strict standards of the Homeowners Association (HOA), daily life appears to be arranged perfectly down to the smallest detail. However, behind this orderly facade lies a web of contradictions and tensions, especially when the rigid regulations of the HOA clash with the personal values of its residents. This is where my story begins, a tale not just about differing perspectives but also about the price of pride and excessive control. I am an ordinary resident of this neighborhood where everything seems to follow a set pattern. My family has lived here for generations, and every corner of our house carries the marks of tradition and cherished memories. However, what makes my home truly special is the massive ancient tree that stands tall in the middle of our yard. The tree is not just a source of pride for my family, it is a symbol of life and memory, a silent witness to the passage of time. Its lush green leaves and sprawling branches tell the story of a glorious past, intertwined with summers filled with laughter and evenings illuminated by the warm glow of our home. Each morning, as the sunlight filters through the canopy, I sit on my porch, gazing at the silhouette of the ancient tree, a vibrant piece of nature amidst the modern suburban landscape. To me, the tree is more than just part of the scenery. It is a dear friend, a guardian of countless memories and unspoken thoughts. It has stood by through moments of joy and sorrow, from lively family gatherings to quiet evenings of reflection amidst the busyness of life. However, not everyone in the neighborhood sees the tree the way I do. Among my neighbors, one individual stands out with her strict and uncompromising attitude: Karen, an active and extremely dedicated member of the HOA. Karen is well known throughout the neighborhood, not only for her enthusiasm in enforcing regulations but also for her relentless pursuit of a standardized lifestyle down to the smallest details. To Karen, even the slightest deviation from HOA standards must be dealt with swiftly and strictly. Karen exudes an air of sophistication. Her attire and speech reflect confidence, bordering on arrogance. She considers herself the moral compass of the neighborhood, ensuring that anything failing to meet her standards is treated as an inconvenience that must be corrected. This mindset means Karen never misses an opportunity to criticize or intervene in matters she deems improper. And in her eyes, my family's ancient tree is nothing more than an unsightly anomaly, a piece of nature that does not conform to the rigid regulations she upholds. From the very first letters of complaint and suggestions for tree modification that Karen sent my way, I sensed the growing tension. To me, the tree is not just a living organism but the soul of my home, a connection between past and present. Its presence brings life and depth to my house, setting it apart from the sterile, standardized homes dictated by HOA regulations. Meanwhile, Karen adheres strictly to uniformity, leaving no room for personal expression or individuality. As I stroll through the neighborhood, I often catch glances of skepticism or even envy from my neighbors when they see me sitting peacefully by the tree, lost in thought. They understand that the tree represents nature and memory, yet many of them also align with Karen's perspective that everything must be strictly controlled to maintain the neighborhood's collective beauty. Conversations on the street grow increasingly heated, each person holding different views on aesthetics and communal management. The conflict between natural tradition and modern standards has created a fundamental rift between Karen and me. She argues that, under HOA regulations, a modern neighborhood must maintain aesthetic uniformity, leaving no room for exceptions that might disrupt the community's image. In contrast, I believe that nature cannot be confined to rigid frameworks, and that diversity and individuality are what truly bring life and beauty to a place. This irreconcilable difference in perspective has fueled a growing tension, escalating beyond the point of return. Beyond this, the suburban setting is far more complex than its tranquil appearance suggests. Beneath the facade of a harmonious community, HOA regulations are ruthlessly enforced, compelling every individual to conform to unyielding rules. HOA meetings are often tense, where any dissenting voice is quickly silenced. Karen, as a dedicated member, is always at the forefront of defending and advocating for these rigid decisions, frequently turning discussions into heated debates that divide the community. For me, the ancient tree in my yard is a living testament to nature's resilience, something that refuses to be bent or altered by human will. It stands there, silent yet powerful, reminding me that true beauty cannot be measured solely by numbers or inflexible regulations. Every crack in its bark, every moss-covered branch tells stories of time, of stormy seasons endured, and of sacred moments spent with loved ones. Meanwhile, Karen sees only imperfections that need to be fixed, a supposed threat to the standards of the neighborhood. What started as a minor disagreement over aesthetics and regulations has now escalated into a deep-seated conflict as neither of us is willing to compromise. I try to explain to Karen that the tree is not merely an object to be regulated but a part of my family's spirit and history. However, my reasoning only makes her more resolute as she believes that everything must adhere to HOA rules to maintain order and uniformity in the community. The once peaceful mornings filled with birdsong and the aroma of coffee have now been overshadowed by whispered gossip and mocking remarks from those who side with Karen. I can feel the underlying disrespect in her words and icy glances, dismissing the values I have cherished for years. The clash between rigid regulations and the fluidity of nature has presented an unsolvable dilemma. How can one coexist in a community where every individual holds different beliefs and values? And so, within this setting, my story begins, a tale of conflict between the freedom of nature and the ruthless enforcement of human control. The ancient tree continues to stand tall as a witness to the past, while Karen, with her strict rules, seems determined to turn everything into an unending battle. In quiet moments, as the wind rustles through the leaves and the morning light gently filters through, I wonder, does it always have to be this way? Is there room for flexibility, for a natural beauty that does not need to be constrained by soulless regulations? This is the backdrop, these are the characters, a lover of nature with a warm heart and a guardian of order who refuses to accept anything beyond the rules. As each day passes in this neighborhood, I realize one undeniable truth: life is full of surprises and inevitable conflicts when people try to define beauty in their own rigid ways. And though the initial tension began with quiet murmurs on the street, it promises to lead us into a dramatic journey where every step of fate carries an unexpected twist. After the initial quiet days with the old tree and indirect conversations, the conflict between Karen and me gradually became tense and inevitable. In the stifling atmosphere of the suburban neighborhood, everything seemed like it only needed a small spark to ignite. And for Karen, the old tree in my yard was the dark cloud that she found utterly unforgivable. From the very beginning, Karen could not hide her discomfort whenever she glanced at the tree. She believed that, with its towering height and sprawling canopy, it blocked the natural sunlight from reaching the roofs of neighboring houses. Not only that, but she also complained that such an out-of-place tree disrupted the aesthetic uniformity that the HOA, Homeowners Association, had worked hard to maintain for the entire neighborhood. According to her, a beautiful neighborhood must adhere to strict regulations, leaving no room for individual personality to stand out. Karen's objections didn't stop at mere words. She repeatedly sent letters of complaint to the HOA management and even delivered some directly to me, demanding that the tree be taken care of immediately. Those letters were filled with sharp words. Phrases like aesthetic issues, community safety, and common standards appeared over and over again, leaving me both shocked and frustrated. I had always cherished the old tree as a symbol of family and memory. But under the weight of rigid HOA regulations and Karen's relentless persistence, I gradually felt exhausted and pressured. At first, I tried to maintain a neutral stance, explaining to Karen that the tree was simply a natural part of the home, a piece of family history that couldn't be easily changed at someone's whim. However, my words only seemed to fuel her anger even more. One afternoon, after receiving the latest warning letter from Karen, I decided to attend an HOA meeting where Karen was often the spokesperson for the community. The atmosphere in the meeting room was already tense from previous discussions, but this time everyone could feel the heat of the issue. Karen stood up, her voice authoritative, citing the HOA regulations and asserting that my tree not only violated aesthetic standards but could also pose risks to neighboring homes by obstructing visibility and blocking sunlight. Her words echoed through the room, garnering agreement from several residents. We need to maintain the beauty of our neighborhood. If we allow this, it could cause bigger problems down the road. Such statements gradually fanned the flames of tension. Meanwhile, I sat in silence, feeling a mix of confusion and sorrow as I watched the community I once loved turn into a battlefield over control and regulations. Not long after the meeting, calls from the HOA management started coming to my house, inquiring whether I would agree to modify the tree. Each call felt like a reminder that, no matter how much I valued the soul of nature, in this neighborhood, beauty and freedom had seemingly been replaced by rigid rules from which no one could escape. Every passing day, I had to face messages, phone calls, and judgmental looks from neighbors, people I once considered friends but who now felt like strangers due to this unwanted conflict. On a Monday morning following the meeting, as I sat by the window gazing at the old tree, the door suddenly swung open and Karen appeared, her sharp features radiating judgment. She didn't say much, only gently reminding me, if you don't deal with this issue, we won't be able to maintain a neat and orderly community. Her words, though spoken softly, carried an unyielding firmness that weighed heavily on me. I tried to apologize for the inconvenience while also expressing my deep appreciation for the tree's value, something Karen seemed utterly incapable of understanding. As time passed, the pressure on me increased, not just from Karen but also from other HOA members who gradually began siding with her rational perspective. They insisted we need to uphold the standards and not let personal sentiments affect the entire neighborhood. I felt increasingly isolated in my own beloved home, as if I had committed some grave offense simply by holding onto a natural symbol that, in their eyes, didn't fit the common standards. At night, after the noise of heated phone debates and brief HOA meetings had subsided, I could only curl up in my small room, feeling the cold wind slip through the window as if to remind me that in this space, my freedom and individuality were slowly being extinguished by the rigid rules of an uncompromising system. I reminisced about the peaceful moments with the old tree, the afternoons with my family, the joyful laughter of children, and the whispers of the wind as if urging me, don't give up on what you love. But Karen would never accept that image. She became increasingly aggressive, pushing the HOA management to make an immediate decision to correct the issue. More meetings, more warning letters, and even chance encounters on the street, all aimed at enforcing the aesthetic order that Karen believed would benefit the whole community. But to me, those efforts felt like an attempt to erase natural beauty, to erase the spiritual values the tree had carried through the years. One of the most intense moments occurred on an autumn afternoon when golden sunlight filtered gently through the tree's leaves. I was tending to the tree, sweeping up fallen leaves, when suddenly I received an urgent message from the HOA, please come to Karen's house immediately. There's an issue related to your tree. My heart pounded, why such a message now? Shortly after, Karen called me directly, her voice filled with maximum tension. Your tree is seriously affecting the area, and if it's not dealt with immediately, I will have to take legal action. Her words struck like lightning to my soul, making me realize that this battle wasn't just about a tree, it was a clash between the cold modern perspective and the emotional depth of natural beauty. I had tried to explain that the tree couldn't simply be judged by regulatory terms, that it held memories and spiritual value that couldn't be replaced. But my words seemed to vanish into the wind, leaving only an awkward silence among those around me. The pressure on me continued to mount, and I felt increasingly backed into a corner, left with no choice but to face the HOA's decision. The management, initially neutral, could no longer stand in the middle of this ideological battle and slowly leaned towards Karen, the one advocating for order and community standards. Every phone call, every letter, and every confrontation seemed to reinforce the idea that the presence of the tree in my yard was no longer acceptable under the HOA's framework. Inside me, a fierce inner struggle was taking place between loyalty to my family's traditions and belief in natural beauty and the pressure to conform to rules that I never agreed to in the first place. Every night, as darkness fell, I found myself lost in thought, questioning the true value of the old tree. Had I been wrong in resisting change for the sake of rigid regulations? Or was it Karen's stubbornness and arrogance that had truly caused all this turmoil? These questions cut through my mind like sharp blades whenever I looked at the old tree glowing under the streetlights. Gradually, the conflict was no longer just between Karen and me, it was between two worlds, the world of nature, where things lived freely, and the world of modern humans, where everything was measured, standardized, and controlled. And in this battle, everyone seemed like a pawn, helplessly pushed into an endless struggle. So, as each day passed, I felt the growing unease and tension in my living space. What had started as a minor issue, an old tree, had quickly become a symbol of deep-rooted conflicts over values, beauty, and the right to live freely. Karen, with her stubborn persistence, wasn't just demanding changes to the tree, she was challenging the very principles I believed in. And as much as I wanted to protect what I cherished, I also began to realize that when people interfere too much with nature, the result is always an escalating cycle of conflicts beyond anyone's control. Looking back, I understood that life wasn't as simple as the picturesque image of suburban homes suggested. It was full of contradictions, moments of tension, and difficult decisions. In that reality, the old tree, though just a living being, had become a symbol of life, memories, and freedom. And Karen, with her seemingly reasonable arguments, would never understand that sometimes beauty cannot be forced into a rigid mold, it must be appreciated in its most natural form. And so, our conflict escalated into a phase where every action and word carried tension, resistance, and the invisible pain of hearts that could never find common ground. Our story, a story of a nature lover versus a protector of order, was heading towards an uncertain outcome, one that no one could predict. After weeks of tension and endless arguments, the breaking point finally arrived on a crisp autumn morning. A hazy mist blanketed the suburban neighborhood, but the cool air did nothing to quell the fiery determination within Karen and her supporters, who championed the standards of the HOA. Stubborn and unwilling to compromise, Karen decided there was no other choice but to take immediate action. She hired a professional tree-cutting crew to resolve the issue of the ancient tree, which she deemed an eyesore in the otherwise perfect symmetry of the neighborhood. The way she informed me of this decision was just as abrupt. One afternoon, as I was tending to the fallen leaves around the tree's roots, my phone buzzed relentlessly with urgent messages from the HOA board and Karen herself. In her sharp voice, she declared, "It's time to put an end to this. We cannot let that tree tarnish the reputation and order of our community." She had no interest in my explanations or my emotional attachment to the tree. To her, the rules outweighed everything. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, the tree-cutting crew arrived in front of my house. They were professionals dressed in safety gear, wielding state-of-the-art cutting equipment. The peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood quickly transformed into one of tension and unease. Neighbors, well aware of the ongoing feud between Karen and me, gathered around, their gazes filled with curiosity and judgment. No one had expected such an extreme measure. The ancient tree, a symbol of life and memories, was about to be taken down at the command of a single, relentless individual. Whispers of concern and murmurs of disbelief spread through the street. I stood at my doorstep, a sense of helplessness and sorrow washing over me as I watched the tree, my family's cherished companion, face a cruel and unjust fate. But to Karen, this was simply a necessary step to beautify the neighborhood. She stood proudly beside the HOA board, as if proving her decisiveness and leadership. While I could do nothing but silently watch, my heart breaking with every second, the chainsaws roared to life, shattering the morning's calm and making the air even more tense. The crew followed their planned procedure, but trouble arose almost immediately. Some workers quickly noticed that the cutting process was not going as expected. The massive tree, with its dense branches and deeply embedded roots, was not going down easily. As they tried to adjust their approach and regain control of the situation, urgent warnings rang out among the workers, signaling that the tree was becoming unstable. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Every eye was fixed on the towering tree, once a symbol of history and resilience, now the battleground between nature and human-imposed order. An almost tangible sense of anticipation filled the air, as if nature itself was retaliating against those who dared to interfere. Suddenly, a deep, ominous crack echoed through the street, the sound of splintering wood and the snapping of cutting equipment. The tree, cut at an unexpected point, began to tilt dangerously. No one had time to react as the massive trunk lurched backward, directly toward Karen's house. In the chaos, people screamed and scattered, while I stood frozen, my heart pounding at the cruel irony of the moment. For a split second, the scene seemed suspended in time. The ancient tree, something I once cherished, was now the force behind an unforeseen disaster. The enormous trunk plummeted toward Karen's house at terrifying speed, giving no one a chance to intervene. Windows shattered, walls crumbled, and the roof caved in, creating a scene of absolute devastation. More than just physical destruction, this was poetic justice in its rawest form. The very act Karen believed would fix everything had instead turned into her worst nightmare. The thunderous crash of wood against metal, the sharp cracks of splintering materials, and the panicked screams of onlookers blended into a symphony of chaos, a dramatic display of nature's resistance against human interference. In that instant, everyone grasped a bitter truth. Nature is unyielding, and any attempt to control it can lead to consequences beyond human imagination. Karen, standing mere feet away, watched in horror as confidence drained from her face. The same person who had fiercely upheld the neighborhood's order and standards now stood powerless before the wreckage of her own home. The stunned silence of the onlookers only heightened the irony. Someone who had devoted herself to enforcing rigid rules was now suffering the direct consequences of her own stubbornness. The crowd, once firmly on Karen's side, now exchanged glances of astonishment, regret, and even quiet satisfaction. The very people who had once supported her arguments were now reevaluating everything, their expressions a mix of pity and poetic justice. Karen, once the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic, had been dealt a humiliating blow by fate itself. As the tree-cutting crew stood dumbfounded, uncertain of how to proceed, I remained rooted to the spot, my emotions swirling in a mix of shock, sadness, and an eerie sense of inevitability. The cold autumn breeze swept through the street, as if whispering a reminder that nature would never be tamed. Everything around me spun in a whirlwind of irony and fate. The tree, though felled, still had the final say in this story. Minutes stretched into eternity before emergency responders and HOA officials arrived, rushing to contain the aftermath. But no matter how quickly they moved, they couldn't undo what had already happened. The sight before us had been permanently etched into the memories of everyone present, a stark testament to the dangers of excessive control and human arrogance. As Karen slowly regained her composure, she stood amid the wreckage of her home, her face a mixture of rage and regret. Perhaps she was wondering if things could have gone differently, if only there had been a little more tolerance, a little more respect for nature. But it was too late for what-ifs. The reality before her left no room for excuses, only the undeniable truth that she had brought this disaster upon herself. As the chaos settled, a new realization dawned on everyone. Through all the arguments and power struggles, nature had found its own way to balance the scales. The tree's fall wasn't just an accident. It was a lesson, a warning about the necessity of respect and coexistence with the natural world. No matter how hard people tried to enforce their artificial rules, nature always had the final word. As the last echoes of sirens and panicked voices faded into the background, a strange emptiness filled me, mingled with a quiet hope. Perhaps, after this tragedy, people would finally understand that between natural beauty and imposed order, nature must always take precedence. And among all the lessons life teaches us, none are more fair than the one fate had just delivered to Karen, the woman who tried to impose strict rules on nature, only to be undone by the very forces she sought to control. The wails of emergency vehicles, the hushed murmurs of neighbors, and the chaotic aftermath of destruction all merged into a solemn requiem, a haunting reminder of the eternal struggle between mankind and nature. Though the great tree had been reduced to broken timber, its legacy endured, standing as a testament to the truth that in the battle between humans and the natural world, there are no true victors, only the unwavering justice of time and the universe. And so, as the daylight cast its somber glow over the ruined home, our community was left to grapple with a new reality, one where past conflicts had reached their inevitable climax, and a hard lesson about pride, intervention, and consequences had been permanently engraved into our collective memory. The tale of the ancient tree, Karen, and the cruel twist of fate would forever be remembered, a cautionary story that none of us would ever forget. As the dust of chaos gradually settled with the new morning light, the entire neighborhood seemed to sink into a state of shock, where the heavy silence spoke volumes of conflicting emotions. Karen's house, once a symbol of order and arrogance in the community, was now reduced to rubble, with shattered wood, concrete, and broken glass scattered across the backyard. The consequences of excessive interference and the decision to cut down the tree had become a tragic reality, sending shivers down the spines of those who now faced the unforeseen repercussions. In the aftermath of the disaster, the atmosphere in the neighborhood turned cold and contemplative. The neighbors, who had witnessed the heated disputes between Karen and me over the past weeks, now gathered, exchanging anxious glances mixed with a bitter sense of poetic justice. They were not only stunned by the sight of Karen's demolished house, but also deeply aware of the profound lesson in overstepping the boundaries of nature. With each fallen fragment, a realization dawned upon them. Nature always finds its own way to respond to human excess. In the first hours following the catastrophe, Karen stood amidst the ruins, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. The once confident words she had used to defend order now trembled into a whisper as she struggled to comprehend the reality before her. She attempted to justify her actions, claiming everything had followed the HOA's standards. But at that moment, no words could alleviate her own pain. Her remorse was not just personal. It echoed as a warning throughout the community, a stark reminder that arrogance and stubbornness could lead to devastating consequences. News of the incident spread rapidly across the area. Residents from neighboring streets, and even those from distant communities, couldn't stop discussing the natural justice that fate had delivered to Karen. Conversations in coffee shops, casual street talks, and family gatherings all revolved around a single question: does excessive interference with nature always come at a price? The question lingered in people's minds, prompting many to reflect on how they lived and on the values they had blindly pursued. The HOA board was equally shaken by the unexpected turn of events. Those who had once taken pride in their ability to control everything in the neighborhood were now forced to face the consequences of their rigid policies. Emergency meetings were immediately held to reassess the inflexible regulations that had once been considered the golden standard of the community. Some board members slowly began to recognize that enforcing rules without flexibility, without respect for nature and the spiritual values of a place, had played a significant role in creating the disaster they now faced. Under increasing pressure from both residents and local media, Karen was forced to confront strict legal procedures. Authorities launched an investigation to determine individual and HOA responsibilities in the incident. Beyond the financial compensation required for damaged properties, Karen also had to endure the shame and criticism of the community, a punishment far greater than any monetary loss. Many saw this as a necessary wake-up call, a harsh lesson for those who imposed rigid rules at the cost of personal freedom and natural beauty, all for the sake of an unforgiving system. I, who had once grieved the loss of the ancient tree, a symbol of memory and love for nature, could not help but feel disheartened by the irony of fate. Though I bore some guilt for not standing up for the tree when I had the chance, deep down I always believed that nature would find a way to restore balance, to bring justice to those who defended its true value. And through the storm of emotions, I gradually realized that every tragedy presents an opportunity to learn and change. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood began to shift. HOA meetings were reorganized, this time with active participation from residents who sought to rebuild trust and restore the value of nature. Discussions emerged about modifying regulations to be more flexible, to prevent rigid rules from overshadowing spiritual values, artistic expression, and individual diversity. Many voiced that if a community only focused on uniformity at the expense of identity and uniqueness, then it would lose the very essence of life's beauty. Amid these heartfelt conversations, my story, the story of the ancient tree, the memories attached to it, and the battle between nature and imposed regulations gradually became a symbol. It was no longer just a cautionary tale about interfering with nature, but a testament to how change comes when people listen and understand one another. Many began to reassess their way of living, realizing that nature is not something to be adjusted to human preferences, but something to be respected and preserved as an essential part of life. The story did not end merely with bitter consequences. It carried a powerful lesson. Excessive intervention, whether in nature or in others' lives, leads not only to material loss but also to the deep erosion of a community's values. Impulsive actions, decisions driven by arrogance and self-righteousness, inevitably meet their reckoning under the unwavering laws of nature, a force that neither bends nor forgives. For Karen, the destruction of her home was more than just the loss of property, it was the loss of her confidence and the reputation she had once taken pride in upholding. She came to understand that in life, nothing is more valuable than knowing when to step back, when to respect, and when to flow with the natural course of things. The silent tears she shed amid the ruins of her house became a symbol of remorse, but also the beginning of self-reflection and transformation. As the community emerged from this psychological storm, a renewed sense of unity began to take shape. Residents came together to restore their living space, mend relationships, and work toward a future where nature and human values coexist in balance. Through every conversation and every small yet meaningful step, people slowly understood that true harmony is not achieved through rigid rules, but through respect, empathy, and shared understanding. Though I still mourn the loss of the ancient tree, a piece of my past and my family's soul, I also recognize that with every loss comes an opportunity for rebirth. My story is not just about a tree or a conflict between personal freedom and regulations. It is a reminder to us all about the importance of living in harmony with nature, of listening and understanding rather than imposing and controlling. The final lesson life has taught us through this event is that no system or rule can replace the intrinsic value of nature and human connection. Any attempt to intervene, no matter how well-intentioned, if done without flexibility and respect, will ultimately lead to unintended consequences. And perhaps nature's justice always comes in the most ironic ways. When people neglect responsibility, grow arrogant, and forget the essence of life, nature steps in to deliver a lesson, one that is harsh yet profoundly meaningful. Looking back on the entire ordeal, from the initial conflicts to the climax and finally the devastating aftermath, I have come to realize, life is ever-changing and only self-awareness, humility, and gratitude can help us move forward. The incident at Karen's house was not merely an accident, it was a turning point for an entire community, a powerful reminder that between natural beauty and artificial rules, nature will always hold the highest authority. And so, as the storm of emotions passed, the community collectively reflected on past mistakes, rebuilding trust and looking toward a better future, one where every person, every family is free to express their individuality, to live in harmony with nature, and to be respected for who they truly are. This lesson, though painful, marked the beginning of real change and genuine freedom in how we navigate life.